Our final story for this edition of the Rolling Stone comes to us from dictionary.com. The story is a little over a week old, but I just couldn't pass it up because it is right after my own heart. So, I've said before that when you get right down to it, the transgender ideology, and in fact a lot of the culture war itself, boils down to a fight, a battle, a war, if you will, over language. Is language simply a human invention that can mean whenever people want, whenever they want, or does language actually have intrinsic meaning of its own? Is it actually the house of being, as Martin Heidegger said? Well, another front has opened up in that war, kind of proving my point, because now dictionary.com, which is one of the biggest dictionary websites, if not the biggest one in the world. I forget exactly which one. But on August 6th, dictionary.com's official Twitter account tweeted out this: beware the TERF. TERF, of course, is an acronym for trans-exclusionary radical feminism, or trans-exclusionary radical feminist. Okay, so these are the old school feminists. The old school feminists who believe that womanhood is actually a biological category and not simply something that an individual feels, thereby making that person a woman, whether or not they actually are women. Okay? That is what a TERF is. And dictionary.com tweeted out that we have to beware TERFs. This came about, of course, as dust is still settling over the ruckus that J.K. Rowling caused when she tweeted out again, basically stuck her finger, I should say, in the eye of the establishment when she said that she does not believe that transgender women are women, because, of course, that gets rid of everything. That undercuts everything, even the progressive stuff, as Rowling pointed out. For example, if anyone can be a woman, then really woman has no intrinsic meaning in and of itself. Again, that's true for all language. But, she tweeted, and think about this, if there is actually no such thing as woman, if there's no such thing as man, then how can there be something like same-sex attraction? If sex is ultimately meaningless because all that matters is feeling instead of actual anatomy and biology and essence, then how can there be something like same-sex attraction? How can there be gay couples? How can there be lesbianism? Right? If that's true. And J.K. Rowling is still being raked over the coals. This past week there was an op-ed in the Huffington Post about the sadness that people have because so many of their heroes, they cited J.K. Rowling and Ellen DeGeneres, their heroes are falling around them. You know, Ellen, she's not as nice as she pretended to be. She's a fraud. And J.K. Rowling, oh my God, she doesn't think that trans women are actually women. She thinks that they're frauds, that they're actually men. They're biological men. Like, they are. My gosh. So, into all this, dictionary.com comes saying, beware the TERF. Beware them. We don't want them. Because, and of course they, spew the usual line about how transgender people are more apt to be victims of violence, and there's been a rise of murders of transgender people, and that in and of itself is a lie. Rod Dreher, earlier this year, had a great blog post that everyone should read. I will link it down in the description, where he went through, at that point in time, all the trans victims of homicide, the trans homicide victims that people usually cited to say that there was this growing wave of violence against trans people, and therefore we needed to call transgender people by their preferred pronouns. We needed to say that biology didn't matter. We basically needed to accept the transgender ideology's lie in order so that all this violence would stop. Because if we maintained our belief in biology, if we maintained our belief in reality, then we were going to be culpable in more transgender people being killed. That was basically that was the argument back then. Rod Dreher went through every single example, and guess what? It was over a dozen examples that he went through. Only one or two could possibly be cases where you could say, yes, this person was murdered because he was transgender. Okay? So even that was a lie. But, of course, facts don't get in the way of a good narrative. So anyway, that is the setup for why dictionary.com sent out this asinine tweet. And also this argument that we have to beware of feminists who just 40 years ago were the great heroes of our civilization. Right? Remember when second wave feminism said that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle? Those good old days when women don't need men, women are autonomous. Now, feminism is supposed to say that a man can become a woman. Of course, a woman may not need a man like a woman may need a man like a fish needs a bicycle, but if he so wills, the fish can become the bicycle. Or maybe the bicycle can become the fish. It just sort of depends. And because some of those old school feminists, or just some of these feminists who have not ejected all of their rationality, all their reason, and all of their common sense outside of their craniums, they are now the dangerous ones. This raises, this raises a fascinating and a very potent question, for which I will admit I do not have an answer right now. But the question is this: how do we actually conserve our knowledge? How do we conserve what is true? It used to be 15 years ago, when the whole fight over marriage was happening, that people would go to the dictionary and they would say, look, the definition of marriage is between a man and a woman. Look, the definition of a man is this. The definition of a woman is this. Because that's really the role of dictionaries. They are supposed to be roadmaps, as it were, linguistic roadmaps. Because again, operating under the idea that language, and the truth, I should say, that language has inherent meaning. Dictionaries are our roadmaps to those meanings. We look up words in order to find out what they mean, so that we can actually grow our powers of language and communication. But what happens when those roadmaps start lying to us? Well, you can't trust them. But even deadlier, let's say that this definition of TERF stays. And it's not just added to dictionary.com, but it's added to all dictionaries, online and printed. Let's say that dictionaries then change the definition of man and the definition of woman. And all the true definitions are made obsolete. So you have to go back to an old dictionary in order to find that old definition. Even if you can find them. Because again, so many times our research and our knowledge comes from the internet now, right? Not from books. So how are we supposed to actually maintain the truth? How are we actually supposed to hold on to the truth when the road maps, then the regular maps, and the signs are lying along with the culture? That is a very profound question. And again, I wish that I actually had an answer to that. I honestly wish that I did. I've been thinking about that ever since I read this story about dictionary.com. I haven't come up with an answer yet. But an answer I'll keep thinking about it. You guys keep thinking about it too. If you have ideas, let me know in the comments section. but it's a question that demands an answer, and then it demands action. Actually, not just an answer, but it demands that answer actually being implemented. And there's one other point to be made here. There's one other point. We are seeing what happens every single day. We're seeing what happens when you lose a culture war. Last week, we talked about how Colin Kaepernick won and how kneeling for the Pledge of Allegiance is the norm and standing is what's abnormal. Okay, that was one example. Here is another example. When you lose the culture, even things that you thought would never, ever, ever be affected, like mathematics or like the dictionary, all of a sudden become new fronts in propaganda, and they become new tools in a society that looks more and more and more like like this freak and horrific combination of Brave New World in 1984. That's what happens when you lose the culture. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The American conservative movement thought that it could lose the education system, it could lose the entertainment industry, it could lose music and books and literature and movies and everything else. But if we kept the think tanks and if we kept getting our people elected to office, everything was going to be fine. It doesn't work that way. Because if dictionary.com has done this on the transgender issue, what other words is dictionary.com going to redefine? For example, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, everyone on the left, they keep talking about defending democracy. But what is democracy? Is dictionary.com going to define democracy as a progressive ideology and system of government where the people continually march for greater and greater freedom, equality, and autonomy and happiness, which will exclude most of what conservatism is supposed to at least stand for? Is that going to happen? What if it redefines Christianity from a belief system founded by Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD to an oppressive ideology that has brought nothing but slavery, violence, war, sexism, and homophobia to the places where it has been implemented? What's going to happen once something as fundamental, a building block of understanding like a dictionary, like dictionaries, are taken? Then your grasp of knowledge, it just slips right out of your fingers. You are then in an almost powerless situation to actually maintain your own beliefs or to pass down those beliefs, the truth, to other generations. That's what happens. When you lose that culture that allows that to happen in the first place, then everything that happens afterward just reinforces it. That's what we have to understand, and that's the solution that needs to be found. Something to reverse that process. But I've been talking for long enough, gang, been trying to keep it a little shorter for you all, so I am going to wrap it up here. Again, leave me your thoughts, comments to any of these videos, any of these topics in the comments section. Take care, have a great weekend, stay safe, stay free, and I will talk to you all later. Ciao!